Welcome, everybody. I wanted to go through this. Was someone stealing trees with you? You're welcome to do this a couple of ways. If you prefer to read through it yourself and answer the questions that are, attached to it, that's fine. If you want to just kind of listen to me go through it and walk you through some of my thinking, also fine. So, without further ado, let's begin. So this is the page 2 from the book, and if you need the digital one that's scanned in, it'll be the first page that's on the PDF. But this goes, was someone stealing the trees? An officer with the Department of Natural Resources was called to a farm where a landowner had discovered missing trees. The trees were black walnut, a valuable wood used to make expensive furniture. The officer found 6 stumps where once there were living trees. The limbs and branches were left behind. Scattered around the woods were 20 empty beer cans. The officer examined the area and found tracks left by a truck leading across a neighbor's field. The perpetrator of the theft had then cut through the boundary fence. By following the tracks, the officer found where the truck had slid sideways and scraped against a tree, leaving a small smear of paint. These pieces of evidence were photographed and sampled. The landowner remembered having seen similar tire tracks leading into another wooded area 2 miles up the road. The officer investigated these marks and found several more black walnut stumps and more empty beer cans. The officer documented numerous forms of evidence: a paint sample from the truck, tire tread impressions, and one fingerprint lifted from a beer can. The theft stopped and the case was considered unsolved. 2 years later, a man was caught stealing black walnut trees a couple of counties away, and his truck was impounded. The officer compared the original paint samples to matching paint from the truck. The receipts in the truck from a veneer mill. Veneer is a thin layer of real high valuable wood that they'll put on a lower quality wood. It's used in a lot of furnitures, so you don't have to pay the top dollar price for solid black walnut or whatever the wood may be. Suggested that the men had been stealing the logs for some time. Excuse me, the man, not men. The paint on his truck was consistent with paint found at the crime scene, and his fingerprints matched the fingerprint found on the beer can at the scene. Based on the evidence, he was convicted, fined, and sent to prison for 6 years. An observant investigator was able to collect sufficient evidence for a jury to find the man guilty of stealing the trees. Oof, right? 6 years. That may seem like an awfully long time to get in trouble or get sent to prison, I should say, for stealing lumber. But again, if you start to associate a dollar value to that, it's actually pretty significant. So with all that being said, let's take a look at these associated questions. We've got our worksheet here, and I'm going to pull this aside, and we'll zoom out just a smidge here. Okay, so to begin, what evidence prompted the tree farm owner to contact an officer with the Department of Natural Resources? Why was this call made? Well, it's missing trees. Or I guess we could say missing/stolen trees. This isn't like a missing dog where something just walked away. Trees have a tendency to stay put due to their large roots and not just wandering off on their own. So you can see where if a landowner showed up and a bunch of valuable trees were gone, you can make the assumption they were stolen. So what type of trees were these? Black walnut. And for whatever it's worth, I've made some black walnut furniture myself. If you got a spare second, Google it and check out the grain pattern and the coloration. Man, it's actually really neat looking. But these were black walnut trees. And if we go back and we were to look at the information of how many trees were missing, there was 6 at the time call was made. But then they talk about 2 miles up the road that there were some more black walnut stumps. So we've got, I guess we could say 6 plus, but 6 for the initial spot that they were at. So if we had to list all the evidence at the crime scene. Now, here's one where I'll go through some of the things that I think, but perhaps I forgot something. And if you wanted to add a bit more, I think that's fine. We've got an eyewitness, right? The landowner has called on the stumps. So are the stumps where the trees used to be evidence? Sure, I definitely think that's something that you could use to prove that something was stolen, right? If we kind of keep reading here, or if we go back and review through the text, there was indeed the stumps. We had, the limbs and branches that were left behind, and then the major part of the tree. That was what was actually taken, because that's where the bulk of the wood is and most of the value there. If we read through this a little bit further, or we go back and recall some of the things that were there, we had beer cans. So I'm going to just kind of put in parentheses here 20, because that's how many were found at the scene of the crime. It's quite a few beers, right? So I guess, if we kind of think about that just a little bit, what's something about that many beers that would tell us? We can either assume you've got someone that was there for a long period of time, or maybe they came back a few times. If these were all the same types of beer cans, a lot of times fellas tend to drink the same brand of beer. Maybe, this was like numerous times that he'd come back and that was sort of his deal. Or perhaps it wasn't just one person, right? 20 beer cans. Maybe this was a bunch of guys that were working together and they were just all drinking the beers. But nonetheless, that's some evidence that we've got left behind. We've got some tire tracks. And it looks like they could determine that it was from a truck. So I'm going to just kind of put that in parentheses there. We had the paint sample that was, on the tree. So now what's some other things that maybe you could kind of assume, right? I mean, if a truck slid off and hit a tree to leave paint, maybe now you're looking for a specific color of a truck that's going to have some damage to it. Obviously the paint didn't just jump off onto the tree. There had to have been some contact there, and there's a pretty good chance that may have left some, damage on the truck. So we've got that. We've got the damaged fence. I guess maybe that's something that you could kind of consider here. Maybe that left some sort of unique mark that would have been, caused on the truck. If we get a little bit further on here, we know that there was a second site where there was really kind of more of the same rather than just repeating these same things. I'm just going to put a second site there. We got a fingerprint, right? That's huge. But, here's something to kind of consider. Sometimes kids will think, oh, you got a fingerprint. You just match those up and boom. I've seen on the old CSIs, they run it off and 10 seconds later, the computer spits out a picture. Not always. If this person's fingerprints aren't on file and you've just got a fingerprint, that's great, but you've got to have someone to match it to. So continuing on here, we did have the fingerprint. Later on down the road, it looks like they found, the guy, then they caught him again, and they had some receipts that are from a lumber mill, right, where they were using the or buying the stolen logs. We've got the truck that got impounded. So, I guess here I'll just kind of put the truck impounded. Maybe they could have, besides matching up the paint, found, black walnut bark or something to that effect on there. And let's see if I'm forgetting anything here. It looks like he'd been selling the logs for some time because there was quite a few of the receipts that were there. The fingerprint did indeed end up matching, but with all that bits of evidence there, you could actually build a pretty strong case. So were trees missing at other places? Yes, this had been going on for quite some time. It looks like the first landowner that had called, a couple miles up the road, there was some trees that were stolen. Everything kind of just went radio silent there for, it looks like, quite some time, 2 years, it says, before a few counties down the road. Now, does that mean that this guy hadn't done it for 2 years? It's hard to say, right? Maybe he'd been doing it consistently, but just someone didn't notice that the trees were gone in a wooded area, or they hadn't called, or it just wasn't reported. Perhaps he'd been, continuously stealing trees and just flew under the radar. Maybe the guy only does this when he's hard up and actually really needs the money. We're not too sure. So yes, there was trees missing at other places. How did he get caught? Well, that was the 2+ years down the road in another county. And it looks like he got caught stealing the trees, kind of doing the same thing. So here's something else that I think is important. If we look at which bits of the evidence collected enabled the jury to find the man guilty, it's important that you understand all of it. The stronger case you can build, the more bits of evidence, the more proof you can come up with, the stronger your case would be. So we may debate about how eyewitnesses could be good or bad, or fingerprints. Maybe someone, we get into a ladder unit and we look at, maybe someone interpreting them differently. Maybe they couldn't match them up properly. There were some errors there. It wasn't a full print. But to be honest with you, fingerprints are an awesome piece of evidence. But I guess what I'm getting at is all of this together makes a real strong case. If I come home and there's cookies missing from my pantry, I can assume the cookies didn't just take off on their own. But now if I come home and there's cookies missing from my pantry, and my kids got chocolate on their fingers and face, and I find crumbs up in their bedroom, now I can build a pretty strong case to prove to my children that they ate cookies without permission. So long story short, evidence. It's just going to be something that you use to prove something did or did not occur. And the more of it you have, the stronger your case. Hopefully that adds a little bit of insight. If you've got questions, concerns, or perhaps I forgot something, feel free to leave it in the comment section or email me or see me in class. Until we meet again, bye-bye.